"Rowan, honey, won't you offer Kai a glass of wine?" My mother asked me. I glanced in Kai's direction. His eyes narrowed and glassy. I pursed my lips and grabbed the wine glass. "Kai, would you know he cut me off?" It wasn't loud, but I could tell he was fuming. I nodded and set the bottle down. "Don't act upset. That will let him win." I lowered my eyes back to my plate and continued to listen to the conversation around me. I wanted to glare at my mother, but decided against it. Even the slightest bit of spite wouldn't change the future for me. Seeing that her little plight didn't work, my mother didn't ask me to offer Kai anything else for the rest of the night, in which I was extremely grateful. The more I sat there thinking about the marriage, the more I felt a surreal hatred towards my parents. What could have possibly steered them towards an arranged marriage? Marry him or move out. Those were the options I had. No explanation. No reasoning behind the decision. A choice. Marry someone I had never met, or be disowned. Seeing that the only family I had ever known were my parents, and I had no means of self-dependability, I defeatedly agreed to marry Kai Parker to avoid being alone and helpless. To almost anyone, that'd be considered the stupidest decision ever made, but to me it was my only option. At the time, I didn't know Kai Parker would hate me as much as he does. I picked at the rest of the food on my plate. The word appetite had been foreign to me for weeks now. Everything Elle ate had to be forced inside of me. When you're sold away, your self-worth seems to go with it. Often when I was younger, my parents would always tell me to look at the bright side of every situation was in. Now, I couldn't find a bright side in sight. Finally, everyone was done and the Parkers were ready to leave. I sighed in relief as they walked out of the front door, a very irritated Kai Parker following them closely behind. I waited until the car was through the gate before I allowed myself to cry. Call me selfish, but a world where everything is decided without a say isn't a world I wanted to live in. My own fiance hates me, just because we're forced into this arrangement. It confused me why he hated me so much. Who said we had to act as a married couple? Couldn't we at least be friends? I wiped my eyes and sighed. How was I going to get through this? The sun filtered through my curtains and warmed my face. I opened my eyes and squinted at the ceiling. My head was pounding and my eyes were swollen from crying. I already knew I looked like a mess, but I rolled out of bed to meet my reflection anyway. This could be worse, I told myself as I studied the damage. Aside from my puffy eyes, I didn't look as bad as I felt. "Rowan, get down here." Mother's high-pitched voice echoed through the walls. After rolling my eyes and contemplating refusal, I stalked downstairs to see what she wanted. I was met with a wide smile as I walked into the kitchen. "Yes?" I asked grumpily. "Get a shower, you're going on a date with Kai today," she exclaimed. My throat went dry. Date? With him? Then the memory of last night's proposal came back and I suddenly felt a panic begin to rise in my chest. "No, I'm not doing that," I said, my hands beginning to shake. My mother frowned. "And why not?" "I'm not sure, maybe because he hates me." Elle gaped at her. Mother rubbed her temples. "Rowan, he doesn't hate you. How do you expect this marriage to work if you don't go on at least one date with him before the wedding?" "I never said I expected this to work. This was all your idea. I didn't want this, and I still don't." Mother sighed, but didn't argue. If there was one thing she never did, was argue when neither of us were willing to budge. "It's just a date, Rowan. What's the worst that could happen?" "As opposed to what?" "Our already unbreakable bond full of undying love and support." Elle asked. "Rowan, don't get smart. He'll be here to pick you up in 2 hours. Please dress nice and remember your manners." I wanted to scream. How could she be so insensitive? Without another word, I turned and ran up the steps, slamming my door like a child. How was I supposed to go on a date with the person that would easily rip my head off if Elle gave him the chance? Kai was known for being an ass, but for some reason I got his most dick-like behavior. I tried to replay in my mind every instance of being around him before the arrangement, but I never did anything to piss him off. In fact, we were pretty neutral up until a few weeks ago. I groaned and headed over to my dresser. I had 2 hours to prepare for my date from hell. I grabbed a sleek sleeveless black cocktail dress and silver pumps. I hung them up in the bathroom and turned on the faucet. I made it a point to avoid looking in the mirror as I undressed. Seeing myself at all today was going to be a struggle. Hoping the steam would take the puffiness out of my eyes and the tension out of my muscles, I stepped into the shower and held my face under the hot stream. As inviting as the warmth was, I couldn't even enjoy it. The thought of Kai's disgust always prominent on his face when he looked at me was enough to make my stomach turn. How was I going to do this? I turned off the faucet and pulled back the shower door. I quickly dried off and began to speedily get dressed. I glared at my reflection. My hair was in soaked strands falling around my shoulders, and I looked like I hadn't slept for days. I tried my best to make myself look as alive as possible, but nothing could fix the dark circles that showed through the concealer caked on my face. I looked dead. After drying my hair and giving it a slight curl, I grabbed a pocketbook out of my closet and headed down the steps to wait. Mother gasped loudly when she saw me. "Oh my God, you look absolutely stunning, Rowan. Kai is in for a real treat," she smiled, wiggling her eyebrows for effect. I simpered, only she thought so. The doorbell rang and my heart sank. "I think he's here." Mother squealed at me, running towards the door. I panicked and quickly ran upstairs. "Kai." "Welcome, please come inside," my mother's shrill voice sounded through the entire house. My heart was beating a mile a minute. "Rowan." Biting my lip, I carefully and slowly walked down the steps. His eyes were no different than the last time I saw them. Dark and angry. I gulped as I neared them. I tried my best to keep my eyes on the floor. "Well, aren't you both the cutest couple?" my mother smiled. I bit my lip even harder. I could feel Kai's anger radiating off of him like a light. I looked up at Kai, who was already looking at me. "Are you ready?" he asked, slightly impatient. I nodded quietly. "Then let's go." I followed him out of the house and to his car. He got in the driver's seat and turned on the car. I didn't expect him to open my door at all, but for some reason it was still disappointing that he didn't. After buckling my seat, I sat back and stared out the window. The silence was awkward, but conversation would be worse. I spent most of the drive looking out the window, hoping something flying by would distract me enough to forget I was sitting beside Kai. I could feel his eyes on me every so often, and would only shrink into myself each time until he looked away. Once we pulled into the parking lot of the restaurant we were apparently eating at, Kai put the car in park, took the keys, and got out of the car, slamming it behind him. As expected, he didn't open my door and started for the front doors of the restaurant, as if I wasn't even there. I let out a sigh of relief that I wouldn't have to walk with him into the building, and quickly got out of the car. Once we both got inside, I immediately felt my heart sink to my feet. It was as if the entire restaurant knew us. Amongst the stares and the whispering, I found my cheeks getting more and more red with embarrassment. Kai seemed to be just as off-put as I was, and stiffly guided me to our reserved table with his hand coldly resting on my lower back. I slightly flinched. It was the first time he had ever touched me. There was no warmth behind it, not even a want. It was forced, almost obligatory. I wanted to feel something in it, something that would give me hope. I instead found his discomfort, which for reason didn't surprise me. I kept my eyes cast downward as I sat down. Dread filled me entirely as I realized we were facing each other, which ensured conversation eventually. Picking at my nails underneath the tablecloth, I tried to find a way to make myself seem less angsty than I felt. Just his presence alone intimidated me. "May Elle interest you in some refreshments?" The server's smile seemed to fade as she noticed the immense tension between us. Kai spoke first. "Give me a scotch. On the rocks." "All right, and for you, ma'am?" I glanced down at the menu and bit my lip. The only drinks available were alcohol and water. A water is fine." "Thank you," I gave her a slight smile. Kai muttered something under his breath as the server walked away. I didn't need to hear what he said to know it was about me. It felt as if Elle had just been punched in the stomach. I hated feeling alone and degraded. My nose began to burn, which meant tears would soon follow. "Dry it up," Don't let him see you cry. He doesn't deserve the satisfaction. I instead directed my attention to the interior of the restaurant, which was the most beautiful restaurant I had seen in a long time. The tables were dark mahogany, with gold accents branching up the spindled legs. The curtains, a deep wine red with flaked gold tassels tying them back, draped elegantly around the clear windows. The chandeliers hung in massive clusters on the ceiling, each light giving off a warm glow. If I hadn't have been here with Kai, I might have been able to enjoy it. The server returned with the drinks and set them at our places. Are you both ready to order? Or do you need a little more time? I'm good to order now. Kai informed, setting his scotch glass, now only a fourth of the way full, on the table. I quickly skimmed the menu trying to find something, while Kai was ordering his weight in appetizers and entrees. And you, Maham? The server smiled. I will take the chicken Alfredo, please. Okay, any appetizers or sides? The server asked politely. Just the Alfredo is fine. Thank you, I responded quietly. The server wrote down our orders and quickly walked to the kitchen. Tell me you aren't one of those girls that has to starve herself all the time, Kai pressed. At first, I was shocked that the first thing he had said to me all night was an insensitive insult, but then I realized he was slightly drunk, based on his empty glass. Not that it would make a difference from his sober comments. Lightweight. I kept my lips pursed and continued to look down at my lap. The food couldn't come soon enough. This date felt like a year of Sundays. Kai was getting almost as impatient as me. He had now downed at least 3 glasses of scotch and was working on his 4th. Drunk was an understatement for his behavior. When the server finally arrived, I tried my best to keep as far under the radar as I could, assuming he was an angry drunk, and began to quietly eat my food. I'm assuming you don't like alcohol, he slurred. I looked up at him through my lashes. What? Based on your look of disgust towards my scotch glass collection and your choice of water, I'm taking it that you don't like alcohol. Wise assumption. His voice was dripping with irritation, along with overpriced scotch. I didn't want to entertain his comments. I didn't feel like having my first argument with my husband to be in a public restaurant where everyone already judged me to begin with. I don't really have an opinion on it, I settled with that response. Short and neutral. What could go wrong? He responded, scooping a mouthful of food into his mouth. I twirled the Alfredo on my plate before gently blowing on it and taking a bite. I could feel Kai's eyes on me, but I knew if I looked up and met them, I'd be in for another banter. Waitress. I need the check, please. Kai called. I continued to eat silently as Kai signed the receipt and put his card in the clip. Once everything was paid for, we both stood up and headed for the car. Kai tried his hardest to walk straight, but he always ended up going to the side too much, and then overcorrecting his gait, causing him to nearly fall and catch people's attention. I walked behind him, making sure I wasn't in his line of destruction, and prayed silently that no one from this restaurant would ever see me again. Once we got to the car, Kai pulled out his keys. There was no way he could drive, not with as much alcohol as he consumed within the last hour. Kai, I don't think it's a good idea to drive. Just sit down, Kai slurred. You really aren't in the condition to drive, I said. Sit down. I flinched at his raised voice. What was Elle going to do? Argue with a drunk, angry person who already didn't like me? Kai got in the car and turned it on. Even though every part of me was screaming to not get into the car, I obeyed and sat down.